Most men lose power in life not because they are weak, but because they overextend themselves. Every time you beg, chase, or over-explain, you reduce your value in the eyes of others. Power is not taken, it is perceived, and perception is built through control and restraint. When you explain too much, you start to sound unsure, and uncertainty destroys respect. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. You might not see us again. Machiavelli understood a simple truth. The less you chase approval, the more authority you naturally command. This is not about ego. It is about discipline, emotional control, and strategic silence. The man who stops chasing starts becoming the one others chase without effort. In this video, you will learn how to build value, mystery, and unshakable presence without begging for attention. Stay tuned as we break down 5 powerful principles that reshape how you move in relationships, conversations, and life itself. No begging, no chasing, no over-explaining. Only calm control, quiet strength, and silent influence. When you master this mindset, you stop reacting and start leading your own reality with precision. This is the shift from weakness to power, from approval-seeking to self-mastery, from noise to controlled silence, that changes everything in your life today, forever, now. Subscribe to the channel now if you haven't. You will not see us again. When you stop begging for attention, you start building real self-respect. This is the first shift every man must understand if he wants power, influence, and control over his life. Begging is not always obvious. It is not only money or help. It also shows in how you text people who ignore you, how you keep explaining yourself to someone who already misunderstood you, and how you try to force people to value you. Every time you do this, you send a message that your presence is not enough on its own. Machiavelli understood that value is never declared. It is demonstrated through restraint and confidence. The moment you start seeking attention, you place others above you. You make them the judge of your worth. That is where you lose control. Real power begins when you decide that your time, energy, and presence are not up for negotiation. A man who respects himself does not chase people who ignore him. He does not double-text someone who has already shown disinterest. He does not over-explain his actions to people who are committed to misunderstanding him. Instead, he withdraws his energy and lets silence do the talking. This is not pride, it is discipline. It is emotional control in its purest form. When you stop begging, something interesting happens. People begin to notice you more. Not because you changed who you are, but because you stopped lowering yourself. Human psychology is simple. People value what is not easily available. When you are always available, always explaining, always chasing, you become predictable and easy to ignore. But when you move with calm certainty, people start to question your absence. They start to feel your silence. This is where value is created, not through noise, but through absence. You must also understand that begging is not just external, it is internal. It comes from insecurity, the belief that you are not enough unless others validate you. Machiavelli would say a man controlled by validation is a man already controlled by others. To break this, you must train yourself to sit in discomfort. Let messages go unanswered. Let misunderstandings remain unresolved when they are not worth your energy. Let people assume what they want. Your silence becomes your shield. Your restraint becomes your identity. Over time, this builds an aura of mystery and confidence that no amount of talking can create. People respect what they cannot easily read or manipulate. When you stop begging for attention, you are not losing connection. You are gaining authority over your own life. You are no longer reacting to how people treat you. You are deciding how you will be treated by how you respond. That is the beginning of power. Chasing is one of the fastest ways a man destroys his own value without realizing it. At first, it feels normal. You think if you try harder, text more, explain more, or show more effort, the other person will finally see your worth. But in reality, chasing flips the power dynamic completely. You stop being the prize and become the pursuer. And once that happens, attraction weakens, respect drops, and your position becomes lower than you think. Machiavelli would call this a loss of control, because the man who moves without restraint becomes predictable, and predictability kills power. When you chase people who are not matching your energy, you are teaching them that your time is cheap. You are teaching them that they can ignore you and still receive access to you whenever they want. That is not strength. That is dependency. Real power is not in running after people. It is in being stable enough to let them come to you. Most men misunderstand this. They believe effort is everything, but effort without value is desperation. There is a difference between pursuing purpose and chasing approval. One builds respect, the other destroys it. When you chase, you also start to overinvest emotionally in outcomes you cannot control. You check your phone repeatedly, you analyze replies, you overthink silence, and you slowly lose focus on your own life. That is the hidden damage. You are no longer living for yourself. You are waiting for responses from someone else to determine your mood. That is a weak position to be in. Machiavelli emphasized control over emotion, because emotion without direction leads to self-destruction. The man who chases is reacting, not leading. And leadership is where attraction truly begins. People are drawn to those who are grounded, not those who are desperate. When you stop chasing, you reset the dynamic. You stop overtexting. You stop forcing conversations. You stop trying to fix situations that are already showing you disinterest. Instead, you step back and focus on your own direction. This creates space, and space creates curiosity. Curiosity is far more powerful than effort in building attraction. When someone notices you are no longer chasing, they begin to reassess your value. Not because you changed your behavior to impress them, but because you removed yourself from the cycle of over-availability. This is where respect begins to return. You also start to regain your mental peace. You are no longer emotionally tied to every response or lack of response. You become selective with your energy instead of reactive with your attention. That shift alone changes how people perceive you. A man who is not chasing is a man who has options, self-control, and purpose. Even if he has none of those things yet, the behavior creates the perception, and perception often becomes reality in social dynamics. Machiavelli understood that power is not always about force, but about positioning. When you stop chasing, you reposition yourself from follower to leader, from desperate to composed, from available to valuable. And in that space, real respect starts to grow naturally, without forcing anything. Silence is one of the most misunderstood tools of power. Most men think power comes from speaking more, explaining more, or defending themselves in every situation. But in reality, excessive speech often reveals weakness, not strength. Machiavelli understood that control is not only shown through action, but through restraint. A man who knows when not to speak becomes far more powerful than a man who constantly tries to prove himself. Silence creates tension. Silence creates curiosity. Silence forces people to think. And when people are forced to think about you, you gain influence without effort. When you speak too much, you give away your position, your intentions, and your emotions. You remove mystery from your presence, and without mystery, there is nothing left for people to figure out or respect. Silence protects your value. It stops you from reacting emotionally in moments where control is more important than expression. Most conflicts, misunderstandings, and losses of respect come from speaking too fast and explaining too much. A man who reacts immediately to everything is a man who can be manipulated easily. But a man who pauses, stays quiet, and observes before responding is harder to control. That pause alone shifts power in your direction. Silence also exposes other people. When you stop filling every gap with words, you start seeing how others behave without your influence. People often reveal their true intentions when you are not trying to manage the conversation. This is where real understanding begins, not through arguing, but through observation. Machiavelli would describe this as strategic silence, where you gather information instead of wasting energy defending yourself. Another important truth is that silence builds authority. When you are not constantly talking, your words become more valuable when you do speak. People begin to listen more carefully because you are not always available with an opinion. This makes your presence more impactful. A man who speaks rarely but meaningfully is always taken more seriously than a man who talks endlessly without control. Silence also protects your emotional state. When you speak less, you reduce the chances of saying something you will regret. You also reduce emotional escalation in heated situations. Instead of losing control through words, you maintain composure through restraint. This is where real strength is built, not in loud responses, but in controlled absence of reaction. There is also a deeper psychological effect. Silence creates uncertainty in others. When you do not over-explain, people are forced to interpret your position themselves. This interpretation often works in your favor because people tend to assume strength when there is mystery. They fill the gaps with respect rather than doubt. That is why silent men often appear more confident, even when they are not trying to show confidence at all. Machiavelli would see silence as a form of invisible influence. You are not forcing outcomes. You are shaping perception without direct effort. And in a world where everyone is trying to be heard, the man who chooses silence stands above the noise. Over-explaining yourself is one of the fastest ways to lose respect in any situation. When a man feels the need to constantly justify his actions, defend his choices, or clarify his intentions, he unknowingly signals insecurity, and insecurity weakens authority. Machiavelli understood that power does not come from being understood by everyone, but from being respected even when not fully understood. The moment you start over-explaining, you step into a position where you are trying to convince others, instead of simply standing firm in your position. That shift alone lowers your value. People do not respect what is constantly trying to prove itself. They respect what stands firm without apology. Most men fall into this trap in relationships, friendships, and even work situations. They feel misunderstood and immediately rush to explain everything in detail, hoping clarity will fix perception. But too much explanation often does the opposite. It creates doubt where there was none. It makes simple situations feel complicated, and it gives people more information to question you with. A strong man understands that not everything needs to be defended. Some things are better left unspoken. Your actions should carry weight on their own without you constantly narrating them. When you over-explain, you also give away emotional control. You show that you are affected by how others perceive you. That emotional dependence is noticed quickly, even if you do not say it directly. People can feel when you are trying too hard to be understood, and when they feel that, they subconsciously lower their respect for you. Machiavelli would advise restraint, because restraint creates authority. The less you explain, the more your actions speak for you. There is also a hidden psychological advantage to saying less. When When you do not over-explain, people are forced to interpret your behavior themselves, and in most cases, they fill in the gaps with assumptions that often lean in your favor. Mystery increases perceived value. Clarity removes it. A man who is too easy to read becomes too easy to ignore. Another important point is that over-explaining often comes from a need for approval. You want people to agree with you, understand you, and validate your decisions. But a man who is focused on approval loses his independence. He starts adjusting his truth based on how others might react. That is a dangerous path because it slowly removes your authenticity. You stop standing on your own judgment and start relying on external validation. Instead, a powerful man chooses simplicity in speech. He says what needs to be said, nothing more. If someone understands, good. If they do not, he does not force it. This does not mean being rude or closed off. It means being intentional with your words. Every explanation you give should have purpose, not emotion behind it. Machiavelli would see this as controlled communication, where words are used as tools, not emotional outlets. When you stop over-explaining, you begin to notice something powerful. People start respecting your silence more than your words. They start taking your decisions seriously without needing full justification. That is when your presence begins to carry weight. Not because you talked your way into respect, but because you stopped talking your way out of it. Building value and mystery is not about acting fake or pretending to be someone you are not. It is about understanding human psychology and using restraint to shape how people perceive you. Machiavelli taught that power is often rooted in perception, not exposure. The more predictable and available you are, the less value people assign to you. But when there is mystery, when there is distance, when there is control in your behavior, people begin to pay attention differently. Value is not claimed. It is recognized over time through how you move, speak, and react. A man with no mystery becomes easy to replace in people's minds. But a man with depth, calmness, and controlled presence becomes memorable. Mystery is created when you stop revealing everything about yourself too quickly. You do not share every thought, every plan, or every emotion with everyone. You allow people to discover you gradually. This slow discovery builds curiosity, and curiosity keeps people engaged without you forcing anything. When everything about you is already known, interest fades quickly. But when people feel there is still more to understand about you, they stay mentally invested. Value is also built through discipline. The way you handle your time, your emotions, and your attention tells others how to treat you. If you are always available, you signal low value. If you are selective with your presence, you signal control. Machiavelli would say control over availability is control over perception. You are not always responding instantly, not always explaining yourself, not always present when others expect it. This creates emotional distance, and that distance increases respect. People tend to value what they cannot fully access. Another key part of building value is emotional stability. A man who reacts to everything loses mystery because he becomes predictable. But a man who stays calm under pressure, who does not overreact or over-explain, becomes harder to read. And when people cannot read you, they begin to assign higher value to your presence. Mystery is not silence alone. It is emotional control combined with intentional communication. You also build value by having direction in your life. A man without purpose is easily overlooked. But a man who is focused on his goals naturally becomes more attractive because his attention is not centered on others. He is not chasing validation. He is building something. This creates natural separation between you and people who operate purely on attention and reaction. Machiavelli emphasized purpose and strategy over emotional dependency. When your life has direction, your interactions become secondary, not primary. This automatically increases your perceived importance. Another powerful element of mystery is unpredictability. Not in a chaotic way, but in a controlled way. You do not always respond the same way to situations. You are not overly accessible, not overly emotional, not overly reactive. This makes people pay closer attention because they cannot easily predict your next move. Predictability creates comfort, but it also creates boredom. Mystery creates tension, and tension creates interest. Finally, building value means understanding that not everyone deserves full access to you. You choose who gets your energy, your attention, and your time. This selectiveness is what separates a man of low value from a man of high value. Machiavelli would see this as strategic withholding, where power comes from what you choose not to give as much as what you do give. When you combine restraint, purpose, emotional control, and selective attention, you naturally become someone people pursue instead of someone who has to chase. Power begins where neediness ends. When you stop begging, chasing, and over-explaining, you start regaining control over your life and how people treat you. Machiavelli understood that strength is not loud, it is disciplined and intentional. A man who controls his emotions, his words, and his access becomes unpredictable in the best way. That unpredictability creates respect and curiosity. You do not force value, you embody it through actions and restraint. In the end, the goal is simple. Move with calm authority, protect your energy, and let silence and consistency do the work that words never could.